Hello and welcome to the next video, in which I will show you pretty much everything you need to know in order to start working with HTMX in Kotlin. And to be more specific, we'll implement a simple user form that displays the data in the table, and we'll use Kotlin HTML DSL, HTMX and Ktor as a server to store users in memory. For the styling part, I will be using Tailwind CSS and material Tailwind components, but I will not focus too much on this part. I am no front-end dev, but for once, if I do not return the JSON, I would like this application to look better. And additionally, I would like to generate some noise that looks more or less similar to the actual application compared to the next plain HTML examples. Lastly, before we start, I just wanted to remind you that if you would like to learn how to create backends using Kotlin, then you can join my Ktor course today and learn everything you need from the very basics up to advanced topics like chats with WebSockets, servers and events, and so on. And you can find the link in the description for this video. If you are here, then there is a high chance you've been looking for a Kotlin and HTMX combination, so you already know what it is. But if this is not the case, then let's open up the documentation. And in here, we'll see the first sentence. HTMX is a library that allows us to access modern browser features directly from HTML rather than using JavaScript. And I could go to the main page. We could say a lot that it gives us access to Ajax, CSS transitions, WebSockets, servers and events, and so on and so on. However, this example is what it is about. So instead of writing plain JavaScript, we can simply put attributes in our HTML code. We can import HTMX library, which is, by the way, quite lightweight, small and dependency free. And instead of writing the JS, we can put those attributes that will trigger the request. And the example with the button shows that whenever you click on the button, the post request will be done to the following endpoint. And it will completely replace the outer HTML with ID parent div with the response that we'll get from the server. So long story short, in Ktor we'll be returning HTML responses from our server, and in HTML we'll be writing such an attribute to instruct the JS library how it should replace the content of our HTML page. And I believe this is all we need to know. For now, I highly encourage you to take a look at the documentation later, but for now let's focus on the Kotlin and Ktor combination. So as the first step, let's navigate and let's create a new Ktor project at start.ktor.io. And in here, for the project artifact, I will be using com.coderc. For example, Kotlin HTMX. Let's configure the project because I do not need the version catalog. The version I will leave the defaults, netty yam file. As always, I'll disable including samples, even though it will still probably generate two classes. Let's hit done. For the plugins, I will be using the HTML DSL plugin that will allow us to generate the HTML using Kotlin DSL. Anyway, as the next step, let's hit download, and we can see it is downloaded. So let's extract that. Let's open up the downloads. Let me extract that. Wonderful. And following, let's open up IntelliJ IDEA I will be using. You can use whatever you want on your end. Let's open up IntelliJ IDEA. Users coderc. And we can now see Kotlin HTMX. So let me click OK, trust the project, and it will be opened up on the main screen. In the meantime, the first thing I would like to do will be to set the appropriate JDK. I will be using 23. So let me hit cancel. In here, file, settings, build execution, deployment, build tools, Gradle. We can see in there the Gradle options. For the distribution, I will use wrapper. Gradle JVM will be OpenJDK 23. Let's hit OK. It starts building. In the meantime, let's hit again file, project structure, and in here I need to set the SDK as well. And the language level, I prefer to use the SDK default so that whenever we change that, it will still point to the our version of SDK. And we have the progress. However, IntelliJ is still complaining about the Gradle wrapper. So when you open a Gradle, we have wrapper and the properties, and in there, let me close the window first, you can see Gradle.point8.4. Instead, we need to update to the version at least 8.10, and we can use IntelliJ to do that for us. So possible solutions, and you can see upgrade to Gradle 8.10 and resync. And that's all. And now we will need to wait for the project to sync, so let's wait for a second. When it's done, we should see that this is finished in here, and we can prove that. So let's go in there, src Kotlin, application, KT, routing and templating. The first thing I would like to do will be to get rid of those two files. Let's hit OK, and let's get rid of those invocations. We can see that the code should compile, so let's try to run the application. It may take a while for a second. We can see error running. Let me try once again. Sometimes it may pop up. Yep, everything is working perfectly fine. We can see that the server is up and running and responding at localhost at 8080. So let me stop it for now. And as the next step, let's introduce the repository that will be used to handle our users in memory. So we'll have a simple mutable list of users that will return, and when we'll be creating or deleting users, then we'll be dealing with our in-memory list. So later you can extend that according to your needs. So as the first step, right mouse button on the Kotlin package, new package, and call it repository. Following, again, right mouse button, new Kotlin class, and this time user repository. And here, before start dealing with user repository, I'll introduce the user, the data class that will be responsible for storing the user data. Alright, so data class user, and the first thing I would like to have will be the identifier val ID of string value equals UUID, random UID, and let's invoke the toString value. Next, we'll have a basic fields like first name, last name, and boolean flag indicating whether this is enabled. Vol first name, string value, last name, same, string value, enabled will be a boolean value. Lastly, they created that. I would like to return the timestamp when user was created. So vol created at local date time, and let's default that to local date time. Now, if this is your first meet with Kotlin, then this is how we assign the default value. Splendid. So with that done, let's introduce our in-memory database. Private vol users equals mutable list of, and in here user, and for the first name I'll go with Jane, for example. Last name will be Doe, enabled will be true. Let's add a colon, Control plus D or Command plus D to duplicate, and let's update above values. For example, John Smith, let's make him disabled, false, sorry. In here, true, false, true. I don't know what else we can have. Alice, Bob, Bog, maybe Bob instead, Tom, Hanks, instead of the, I don't know, Williams. Alright, we'll have Alice and whatever. At this point, we have our in-memory database, aka mutable list of users. So I'll introduce three functions to create a new user, to find all users, and to delete users. We'll not be doing the update process because it would require more JS than necessary, in my opinion. And if you will be able to create, delete, and display users, you will be able to easily add that later to your project. So the first one will be, let's go with find all, find all, and this one should later return a list of users. List user equals, and this will simply point to our list. Nextly, I would like to add new users. So create, and it will take first name, last name, and enabled as arguments. So first name of string value, last name of string value, and enabled boolean value. And as a result, I would like to return the returned user. So now equals, firstly, we'll instantiate the user, and in here, for the first name, I will pass the first name, for the last name, I will pass the last name, and the big surprise for enabled, I'll pass the enabled, and I'll use the cool feature in Kotlin, the also. And inside the block, I will specify what I would like to do. So whenever we instantiate the user, the next step should be to add it to the list, users.add, and we can use the it to refer to the created user. Moreover, we can make it even cleaner also and simply use the reference to the users and add function. So this block, this line will be working exactly the same to these. Let's get rid of that. Wonderful. Lastly, I would like to delete the user, and for that I will use the remove if function. So fun, delete. The user will take the identifier of string value, the function will take, it will return a boolean indicating whether the deletion was successful, equals users remove if it id equals to the identifier passed as the argument. So again, whenever we'll find a user with such an identifier as the one passed to the function, it will be deleted and true will be returned. Wonderful. So with all of that being done, we can finally start returning our first HTML responses in Ktor. And for that purpose, I'll introduce the routing package. All right. So right mouse button on the Kotlin package, routing. Again, on the routing, new Kotlin class /file, and let's call the file routing. Again, this will be the file, not the class. Splendid. In here, we'll create the extension function for application. Fun application dot configure routing, and I'll inject the user repository. Excellent. Add plus enter, import, and the important thing is to use the io Ktor server dot application. This one, and in here, routing get. And in there, whenever we will be reaching the root path, I would like to respond with HTML. So call dot respond HTML, and for that purpose, I will already extract the new function. So render index, and we'll pass the user repository in there. So the first thing before we introduce the render index will be to get back to the application and instantiate. Firstly, instantiate the repository, vol repository equals user repository, and nextly configure routing, and let's pass our repository in there. Splendid. So let's go to configure routing, and again, in Ktor, this is the way we define handlers for the requests. And this translates that whenever a GET request will be made to, by default, localhost 8080, we'll respond with HTML that will be defined in this next extension function. And this is pretty common in Ktor to define extension functions, and this way, combining that with Kotlin DSLs, you can have a clean and hierarchical structure. Anyway, let's add a new package called HTML, and we'll add our render index function. So right mouse button, Kotlin, package, HTML, and I'll add, again, right mouse button, new Kotlin class, file index. This is where we will put in our index definition. Firstly, again, we'll introduce the extension function for HTML class, fun, HTML dot render index. Again, it will be taking user repository of type user repository. Splendid. Alt plus enter, import the class. Wonderful. And in here, with the usage of Kotlin HTML DSL will be defining our HTML in the code. So in order to define the body, we'll invoke the HTML body, and I can see already one problem. I have imported javax.swing text HTML. This is not what we want. Alt plus import, and in here, Kotlin HTML. This is what we'd like to do. Now, on the body again, Alt plus enter, and we can see that it was imported from Kotlin library. So again, I would like to add the insert header extension function. So let's extract that already. You will see maybe at this point this looks like over-engineering, but we'll go with this hierarchical structure from the very beginning. So you will see later that this helped us a lot to keep the structure cleaner, in my opinion. So the first thing will be private fun flow content from Kotlin HTML, and flow content is the marker interface coming from let's go actually to the documentation in there. And we can see in here that flow content is the marker interface for plenty of classes representing HTML tags. For example, let's take a look, like address, audio, blah, 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 button, and things like that. So thanks to that, we can introduce the extension function. And in here, I'll call it insert header. Let's go this way, h5, and here, plus user list. Wonderful. Inside our body, I must insert header. Ctrl Alt L, we can see that render in the index is not used. So let's get back to root in KT, Alt plus enter, import the extension function, and let's run our application. In the meantime, let's go to Chrome, in here, and let's paste localhost 8080. Localhost 8080. Let's open up and we can see users list. And before we head to the next part, let's enable auto reload in Ktor. And for that purpose, if you'd like to learn the details, I encourage you to visit my previous video or blog post. Anyway, on our end, let's get back to IntelliJ. I'll show you one interesting feature. So we can stop the application. Let's go in there, edit the configuration. I can persist that first as the VM option dash d io.ktor.development equals true. Let's hit OK, and let's take a look at logs in here. Auto reload is disabled because the development mode is off. So when we enable the development mode, Ktor will be listening for the changes inside the build package, and will enable the continuous build in Gradle, so that whenever we made the change in our code, it will be automatically reloaded without us having to reload the server, restart the server. So firstly, let's start the server. We can see in logs that the message disappeared. That's good for the first thing. And secondly, I'll open up terminal, I'll run Gradle -t build -x skip test. Wonderful. Let's start. Let's wait for a second for the command to finish, and I will show you how it works exactly. Alright, we can see that this is waiting, and it is waiting for our changes in the code. So let's go to render index. Firstly, let's open up Chrome. Let's refresh. We can see users list. Now when I make a change, for example, let's add this, Ctrl+S to save, we can see that Gradle started building the project, and without restarting Ktor server, I can simply refresh the package. So that's basically all I wanted to show you. With that, this is really useful so that we do not need to keep clicking and restarting the server whenever we make any change in our HTML. Wonderful. So with that done, we can start building our form. And for that purpose, just like we extracted index, I'll extract the form. Right mouse button, HTML, it will be Kotlin file, and I'll call that, for example, form KT. Wonderful. Again, this time we will be extending the flow content. Fun flow content, just like previously, insert user form. And so I do not forget about that. Let's get about to index, and under the insert header, I would like to insert form. Insert user form. Ctrl Alt L to format. Wonderful. Let's get back in here. And what I will be doing, I will be simply defining the HTML using Kotlin HTML DSL. The first thing I would like to do will be to define div. Let's open up it. Inside this form, div, again div, and inside this label. I know this is since the very beginning a big structure, I would say, but firstly it allows us to see how we can create easily a hierarchical structure in Kotlin HTML DSL, just like we would do in HTML. And secondly, again, I mentioned that I will be using the ready-to-go material Tailwind components later, and that's why since the very beginning I am adjusting the code according to that component. Anyway, I would like to introduce the label, and in here, firstly, let's add some message. So again, plus and first name. So this will be the text displayed in HTML. And when it comes to attributes, we can add them as attributes as simply a map in Kotlin, or alternatively, for some of them, there are ready to go fields that we can use. For example, for the label, it will be HTML4 equals first name. Excellent. Under the label, I would like to have the input, where we'll be putting first name. So input. And for our input, we'll have type, name, ID, and placeholder to display. So the type will be equals input type, and this will be a text. So again, we can see that we can create HTML in a type-safe manner. The name will be first name, and I can see that in our HTML4, I need to fix the typo as well. The ID will be first name as well, and placeholder equals first name. Ctrl Alt L to format. Wonderful. Now let's copy that div and let's put it beneath. So just like we had for the first name, I would like to have the last name. Last name HTML4. Last name will be the text, name, last name, ID, last name, and placeholder also the last name. Following, we would like to add the radio input. So under this div, let's add a new div, and the label will be account enabled. So label plus account enabled. Under the label, let's add the div. Inside the div, let's add the div. And for the input in here, the type this time will be the input type dot radio, input type dot radio. The name will be enabled radio, name equals enabled dash radio, ID equals, let's go radio button 1 for example, value equals true, this will be the default value. Wonderful. Under the input, we'll have the label for that. So label in here, HTML4 equals radio button 1, and let's add the text yes. Ctrl Alt L. Wonderful. So that was for the input. Under this div, let's put the actual input. So div in here, input type radio, name equals enabled radio, ID equals radio button 2, value equals false, and again the label HTML4 equals radio button 2, and the value will be plus no. So we can see the pattern. Whenever using this plus value, it will be displayed as the actual HTML value within the block, and those are the attributes that you probably already know from HTML. All right, so we had this div, and under this div, and the last one will be the button. Let's open up and let's simply add the add user text. Ctrl Alt L Let's get rid of this. Wonderful. So without restarting the actual application, let's open up Chrome. Let's hit F5. And wonderful. This maybe does not look still like what we want to achieve, but we have our first form. For the future, I'll open up the inspect, the network, and let's take a look in the elements. So we can see that we have HTML, we have head, we have body, our header that was inserted, and all the generated HTML in here. That proves that everything is working fine so far. So with that done, let's add the user table. I know a lot of preparation, but firstly we'll start with the plain HTML form and table, and later we'll add HTMX to all of that. So without any further ado, let's get back to IntelliJ. And again, right mouse button on the HTML, new Kotlin class, and inside the file, I'll add the user table KT. This one will be again the extension for flow content, fun flow content dot insert user table. It will take users list of user, because what we would like to pass here will be the list of all found users. So let's get back to the index. We have insert header, we have insert user form, and lastly we can insert user table and pass all found users. So user repository dot find all. That's all. With Alt plus enter, you can add names to call arguments, also pretty useful feature in Kotlin. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get back to user table.kt and let's start building the table. Again, it will be a bunch of divs and HTML syntax. Div, table, t-head to introduce the header for our table, and inside here, row, and for every th plus, for example, user, Ctrl plus D, Ctrl plus D, Ctrl plus D. The last one will be empty. We want to have user as the user first name and last name in one column. Then we'll have the plus status. And lastly, we'll have created. And as you remember, we have the timestamp. We can leave it this way. Wonderful. Nextly, after the t-head, we must to add t-body. T-body. And the first thing I would like to do will be to set the identifier for it. Why? You will see in a moment. Anyway, ID, users table, and in here, users for each user that we find in our list, we would like to insert one row. So you can see that Kotlin HTML DSL is not only a great way to create HTML because of the hierarchical and pretty similar kind of HTML-ish syntax, but also you can combine the code with all of that to dynamically generate things. So again, I will be using extension function, but this time for tr. So I'll call it insert user row cells user. And this one, sorry, instead of users, user. This is for each found user. Fun tr insert user row cells. In here, user of type user. So for every found user, we'll generate a few columns because we have already tr. So I would like to in here start generating columns, and in there td div p, not println, p. Excellent. And let's add the text. So the first column, as I mentioned, will be the combination of first name and last name, and in Kotlin we can use again plus string value and string interpolation. User dot first name, and in here user dot last name. Ctrl Alt L, wonderful. So this way we'll have one string value that consists of those two values. Then I would like to have another column, td, and inside this column, div, this will be 2 times also div. This is caused basically again by our component that we'll be using later. And again, I can show you that we can create a pretty dynamic code. So firstly, I would like to decide what should be the label. So based on our Boolean flag from the code, I would like to display the text value. So vol enabled label equals, and if user is enabled, then I would like to return the text enabled. Otherwise, I would like to go with disabled. Same, I would like to go for the label color, and I'll do that already in here. So vol label color equals if user dot enabled in here green, else red. Lastly, let's add the span value plus, and in there simply enabled label. Ctrl Alt L. So again, depending on the value from our table, we'll either display the text enabled or disabled. Again, a great example how we can combine those two words together. So the next column will be the date, and I would like to format it. So td in there p and straight plus user dot created at, and I would like to format that already, and I'll use date time formatter dot of pattern, and we can pass the pattern. This will be 1 2 3 4 years, months, days, and for the rest I would like to display hours, minutes and seconds. Hours will be in 24 hours format. And lastly, the last column will be simply the button with a text delete. Later we'll replace that with a custom icon. Anyway, td, and in here button plus plus delete text. Ctrl Alt L Shift plus F, then I didn't have to do that, sorry. Alright, we can see that the application started. Again, we don't have to do that. I forgot that we enabled the mode. So we can see that we have a form, we have some button that will allow us to trigger things. Wonderful. So with all of that preparation done, I know a lot, but now we have everything prepared to start actually working with HTMX and Kotlin. So again, throughout this course, I will be referring a lot to the documentation because I do not think that reinventing the wheel is a good way to go, and in here there is a lot of valuable information. So as the first step, we must import HTMX, and as I mentioned, this is a simple JavaScript library. So in our result file, the only thing we need will be to import that to our header with a script value. So we can do that in HTML DSL. Nevertheless, the important consideration, we can see that the easiest way will be to using the CDN or download a copy. Nevertheless, we should not use CDN in a production, and today it was a great example. Before I started recording this video, the unpacked.com, the directory from which the CDN, from which we would like to fetch the HTMX, was not working. So the project was not able to work. And for that purpose, again, this is the easiest way. Let's take a look if it actually works. It started working, so we'll go with this one. So let's go to the documentation, all right? And we'll use this script value, unpackage.com/htmx.org. Anyway, again, you had a great example that you should consider rather downloading a copy and hosting that on your server, because if your server is down, then still both things are down. However, if the CDN will be down, you will not be able to do anything. Anyway, let's copy the value and let's open up IntelliJ once again. So in here, we must navigate to the index.kt, and above the body, we can add the head. So head, insider, script, and as the src, we'll pass this value. So we can get rid of that, actually duplicate it, Ctrl Alt L, wonderful. Let's save the value, let's get back to Chrome, and let's open up our application. Let me refresh, and inside the head we should see that this downloaded successfully. With that done, let's get back to the documentation actually, and let's learn what we can use to trigger the endpoint. Alright, so we can see that the core of HTMX is a set of attributes that allows us to use AJAX requests directly from HTML. So Long story short, in order to make get, post, put, patch, delete request to particular URL, we'll be defining such an attribute. And as I mentioned, in Kotlin DSL, the most popular attributes, the most commonly used attributes are already defined, but we can also define them manually. So let's get back to our insert user form function. All right, so this was form, insert user form, and just under the form, I would like to set the attribute for post request, all right, because I would like to create new resource on our server. Attributes, and just like a map, post equals / users. Oh, sorry, users. So whenever we click on our form, we would like to trigger this request. So let's get back actually to Chrome. Let's take a look. Let's get rid of those values. Let's refresh. All right, let's get rid. And some user account enabled, yes, add user. And we can see, wonderful. So we already see that the library was trying to trigger the /users endpoint. However, we don't have any handler defined for that, and that's working perfectly fine. So as the next step, let's open up IntelliJ and let's introduce our handler. So we'll get back to routing, and in here I will define a new root /users. This way, again, in Ktor, this is a great way to structure our endpoints, our handlers according to the URL path. I am introducing the root because we'll have two things, the post endpoint and later the delete endpoint to get rid of the user from the list. Anyway, whenever we have the request to the post endpoint, I would like to read the form params like first name, last name enabled. And to prove that, let's get back actually to in here. We can see the payload and we can see that first name, last name and enabled was sent as the payload to our endpoint. So what we'll need to do will be to simply read those values. Alright, so val form params call.receive parameters. Then we can refer to them just like we will be using the map again. So val first name equals form params, and first let's access the first name. Double exclamation mark, because this can return null. So I would like to, this is anti-pattern, however, for the purpose of learning, I would like to simply make sure that first name is not null string value. All right. Ctrl+D to duplicate actually last name and read the last name parameter. Then enabled, Ctrl+D, enabled equals form params, and this is called enabled radio. Let me double check with Chrome. Enabled radio, that's right. And this time I would like to parse that to Boolean. Excellent. So firstly, let's create a new user. So val created user equals user repository create, and we'll pass first name, last name and enabled to our function. With that done, we can generate the HTML, and for that purpose I'll use the create HTML function. So val created user HTML equals create HTML, and for that we have the tr to introduce a new row. And as you remember, inside user table we had our insert user row cells, the extension function for tr. And what's great in here, we can use this once again in there. So insert users row cells and created user. Lastly, a small tiny workaround, because previously you saw that we were responding with HTML. However, this function expects us to provide the whole body, and we cannot do that in here, because what I would like to return will be simply return this single row, the row that we'll later would like to replace in our user table. And for that purpose, we need to use the response text. Call respond text in Ktor, and firstly created user HTML, and secondly will be the content type dot text.html. HTML. Ctrl Alt L, you can see This is a small, tiny workaround. Again, I do not need to refresh the Ktor server. Sorry, I'm just simply class not found exception. I don't know, I see weird errors today. Anyway, this is working fine. So now let's get back to our Chrome. Let's refresh the page, alright? So, Adam, Spanam, account enabled, for example. Now, let's hit network, let's add the user. Well, we can see this is not exactly what we would like to have in here. Anyway, let's take a look at the request. We can see the status 200, okay? Wonderful. We can see the payload was sent. And as a response, we got a beautiful HTML. So, lesson 1, HTMX target. So, let's open up actually the documentation. We have triggerings. Let's scroll down. Let's search for targets. So, long story short, according to the docs, if you want the response to be loaded into a different element other than the one that made the request, you can use the HX target attribute. We haven't provided this attribute. So instead of the table to be the receiver of the HTML response, our form was the one. So when you go back to our application, let's take a look. We can see the body, we have the form, and all the internals of our form were replaced with the response. And this is basically not what we want. Let's refresh the application. So actually, let's get back to the documentation, and we can see that we can provide a bunch of values like CSS selector, also the extended CSS syntax. By the extended CSS syntax, we mean that we can use values like closest selector, next, previous, find. And for the details, I refer you in here. But for example, when we use the previous and we give it the CSS selector, the syntax will find the previous element in the DOM matching the given CSS selector. And again, so what we must do in here will be to point to the user's table. So let's open up in here, Kotlin HTMX. Let me close this window in there. And when we go to the user's table, as you may remember, I can recap that. In there, we have the T-body and the identifier users table. And this is what I would like to refer to in our form. So let me copy this value, users table. Let's go to form, and under this one, attributes, I would like to put one more, hx target equals, and this was the identifier, hash users table. So again, I would like to instruct HTMX to call the user's endpoint. When it gets the HTML request, I would like this to target the user's table. Let's take a look what's going on then. Sorry, again, I do not need to restart the server. No, I need to stop doing that. Anyway, let's get back to Chrome. Let's open up localhost. Let's hit F5. And again, some user account enabled. Let's add the user. So we can see it works better. This is not still what we would like to achieve. Nevertheless, we can see new users are added. Let's go to network. We can see all the requests were made. Nevertheless, when we take a look into the elements, let's go to body. We have in there the table, t-head, and t-body. We can see that all the other elements were removed, and the inner of the t-body was replaced with the response. When I refresh the page, I will see that all the users were created. Alright, so the Ktor server is working perfectly fine. So what's going on in here? Well, the thing called swapping. So let's get back to HTMX, Ctrl+F, swapping. Actually, it's below. So HTMX offers a few different ways to swap the HTML returned into the DOM. By default, the content replaces the inner HTML of the target element, and that's what happened in our case. All right, so network, let me add some user. Let's add the user. We can see users. We got this response. When we go to the elements, we targeted the t-body with ID users table, so the inner of t-body was replaced with whatever we got in our response. And this is matching what the documentation says. So again, by default, the content replaces the inner HTML of the target element. So we can modify this by using the hx swap attribute with any of the following values, and in here, by default, inner HTML. Alternatively, we have outer HTML that replaces the entire target element, so it would get rid of tbody entirely. And what's interesting for us in here will be the before end, so it will append the content after the last child inside the target. So inside our tbody, TRs are the children, and it will append the content, our TR, after the last child. So let's take a look. Let's get back to IntelliJ and just like have attributes hi-h swap equals before end. Ctrl plus S, no need to format. Let's open up our application. Let's refresh something. Allcount enabled. Wonderful. This is exactly what we would like to achieve. When I go with no value, this time we can see that everything is working perfectly fine. When I refresh, wonderful. Also, we can see that the other users were removed because the application was restarted, the Ktor restarted, all right? Excellent. So at this point, we know how to display and add new users with HTMX, so let's learn how we can delete them. So as the first step, let's prepare the Ktor handler that will use the function from our repository. So let's get back to IntelliJ, routing, and in there, /users, I would like to add the delete endpoint in there /id, because we would like to delete user by identifier. In there, the first thing we need to do will be to read the ID parameter, vol id call.parameters, and you can spot the main difference that previously, when dealing with form parameters, we first had to invoke the receive parameters. However, when we are talking about the URL params or query parameters, we can access them directly from the call. Wonderful. Again, we go for the exclamation mark. We go to the user repository dot delete ID, and lastly a small workaround, call.respond, and in there http status code.ok. Ctrl+Alt+L, Ctrl+S so that the server is restarted. And again, the important lessons here. For simplicity, we return to 200 OK response and not 204 no content, which seems to be more reasonable, because by default, HTMX ignores successful responses other than 200. So without any further ado, let's go to our delete button. So this was the user table. User table, in there we had our delete button, and I would like to add a bunch of attributes. So again, to rephrase, attributes, and firstly we'll put the hx delete, and as you remember, the URL should be /users/ and user.id. So whenever we will be rendering our table, we will be already putting the appropriate URL to which we should trigger the delete request. Next, attributes, this time hx swap equals outer HTML, Ctrl+Alt+L, wonderful. And again, with outer HTML, we say that we would like to replace the entire target element with the returned content. So we'll be returning nothing, so the target element will be removed. And what I would like to target? Well, the closest TR. Attributes hx target equals, and again, the extended CSS closest TR, it will be looking for a closest parent of TR. All right, Ctrl+S, let's go to our application, let's refresh, and let's try deleting. We can see this working perfectly fine. And when we take a look, we can see that the delete request was made to the /users/identifier. As a response, we got nothing. When I go to the elements, we can see that everything looks perfectly fine. When I add user, let's hit yes, let's delete it, Wonderful, it is working like a charm. Alright, so at this point we know how to add, how to delete users, and I would like to teach you how to handle errors with Ktor and HTMX. So let's get back to our post handler. Let's go in there, we have our routing, and in our post I would like to add a simple validation. So whenever a first name or last name will be blank string, I would like to respond with bad request, so that later we'll see how the HTMX behaves by default. So if either first name is blank or last name is blank, I would like to return, and we refer to our post call.respond, and in Ktor HTTP status code dot bad request. Ctrl Alt L, Ctrl plus L S. Wonderful. Let's get back to our application. So in here, the thing I need to do will be account enabled, hit yes, and add user. And we can see that the response was 400 bad request. Nothing happened, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, HTMX does not provide any handling out of the box. And when we go to the documentation and search for response error, we'll see HTMX expects responses to the AJAX requests it makes to be HTML, typically HTML fragments. So sometimes we have situations when, for example, we would like to return 204 no content, or otherwise we have also other issues like, for example, not found, or maybe 500 response code, or sometimes we have the connection error, and for that purpose we have two triggers, two events. Firstly, in the event of an error response from the server, like for example 400 bad request, HTMX will trigger the response error event, which we can handle. Or alternatively, in the event of connection error, the send error triggered event will be triggered. So as the next step, let's get back to IntelliJ and let's try to handle those errors. We'll insert a tiny script that will basically trigger the alert whenever any of those two happens. So let's get back to IntelliJ, and firstly let's navigate to index.kt, error occurred, usually happening, sorry for that. And in here below insert header, I would like to insert error handling script, private fun, and this time this will be body from Kotlin HTML. And in here insert error handling scripts, and this will be extension function, and we'll add this to the end of our body block. Alright, so in here insert error handling script, Ctrl Alt L, wonderful. And now I would like to, as I said, add a simple script, script block plus, just like we did previously, and this time we'll be using multi-line script. So in here document.body.add event listener, and let's open up. We'll be listening for HTMX response error, wonderful, and we'll pass the function event, and in there open up alert. I would like to display the alert that the error occurred, and error occurred HTTP status, and we'll display the status plus event detail HR status. Let's close that, let's close the function. Wonderful. I'll copy that. Let's copy this value. This is the first thing. So whenever we will get 500, 400, something like that, then we'll get the response error. However, if the library is not able to connect to our server, we need to handle the send error. And for that purpose, I'll simply display that server is unavailable. Server unavailable. This way, Ctrl plus S. Now it should be reloaded. Let's get back in there. Network. I'll get rid of this. Let's refresh. And let's go. We can see that the error occurred and the appropriate HTTP status was returned. Alright, so let's hit OK. And now I'll get back to IntelliJ. I will turn off the application. So I would like to trigger the second issue. So Let's go for this one. We can see that the request is pending, and after some timeout, we can see that the server is unavailable. And this proves that everything is working fine, and this is how we can handle error responses in HTMX. Alright, so with that done, let me start the application once again. And before we head to the Tailwind CSS part, I would like to do one more thing. So import static resources in Ktor. So we can do two things. Firstly, let's open up Chrome. Let's go to GitHub. github.com/coderc blog. Splendid. In here, for example, let's copy this. Copy the image. Let's get back in there. Resources, and in resources I'll put the new directory emg, and I'll paste this value. So we have emg png. I'll call this instead placeholder. So splendid. Now let's get back to our insert user role cells. So user table, insert user role cells, and I would like this value to be added as a new column. So Ctrl+D. All right. td in there div, and instead of p I would like to add the emg. So I will refer src/emg/placeholder png, Ctrl+S. Now I will have to restart the server as I had some issues. Now as it restarted, let's get back to Chrome. Let's refresh. And we can see that this doesn't work, so our placeholder is not displayed. So we must do a small tweak in our Ktor application. Let's get back to routing, and in there, whenever we are configuring routing, we would like to serve static resources. So we'll be doing that inside routing, static resources in there /emg, and it should refer to the base package emg. Now when I restart, stop and rerun, let's open up, let's refresh. Wonderful. Maybe this is not what exactly we would like to achieve, but this can be tweaked a bit with Tailwind CSS. And for this part, we'll simply copy paste the values from my GitHub. So let's navigate to the repositories. We have Ktor HTMX, and I'll go quickly through that because again, this video is about integrating Kotlin with HTMX, and at this point we know everything we need. About the Tailwind CSS, this is really not the front-end tutorial, so I will be simply reusing what I already implemented. And for the first thing, src/main Kotlin insider HTML, and we have our index. And let's analyze what we have in here. So instead of only having the HTMX import, we'll add additional script for Tailwind CSS. Additionally, on top of that, we are adding a bunch of classes. And whenever dealing with Kotlin HTML DSL, we use the classes value, and we provide a set of classes. So we have two schools in there. You can go and you can pass each class as a separate string value, or the way I did it, I simply copy pasted that. So let me copy raw file, all right? Or maybe this way to avoid imports, and I'll copy that to the index KT. All right, so again, we'll be doing only copy pasting. Ctrl+S, I see imports complaining. Ctrl+Alt+L, wonderful. Then let's open up the form. When it comes to the form, again, we can see only a bunch of classes added, the classes that are responsible for our display. There is no other change in there. So again, I'll copy those values, insert user form, let's get back to the form, and let's get rid of everything and put new values. Ctrl+S, wonderful. What I wanted to talk about is this is more akin to what you will be dealing with in real life scenarios, alright? So you will have a bunch of classes, nested divs, etc. So this is the main reason why I want to pull Tailwind CSS in here. Again, let's get back to the user table. This one will be quite more interesting, alright? So apart from the classes that we already know, the exact same logic, the exact same things. The first thing, label color. So previously we implemented an if-else function to define whether the green or red, and we can see that later inside this we can use the dynamic value to define our class. And that's great combination of both words. However, I wanted to focus on this part. So sometimes you may want to add an HTML code snippet as a string value, and for that purpose you can use the unsafe method, so function. So let me actually copy those values. Ctrl+C, let's open up, let's go to user table. I'll replace the old content, I'll paste the new one. And the unsafe is really important here, that you should not use that directly whenever you are dealing with some variable content, whenever you are dealing with the content that will be dependent on the user input or someone can affect in any way. Because otherwise, let's go to the function. It allows writing strings directly into the HTML DOM without any escaping. And this is the threat. In general, setting HTML without escaping is risky because it is easy to expose your users to XSS attacks. So whenever we are dealing with some hard-coded value, just like in here, that's perfectly fine. Nevertheless, when you are dealing with a variable content, you should either not use that or escape that properly. Additionally, when you are doing it this way, you are losing the type-safe capability of HTML DSL. And basically, I believe that's all at this point. So let's rerun the application for the last time. Let's get back to Chrome. Let's refresh a bit. I'll get rid of this window. Wonderful, we have a user list. Another user. Let's add the user. So we can see it was added successfully. I can delete, and I can distinguish between enabled or disabled account. And we can see that this works perfectly fine. And that's all for this tutorial on how to use HTMX with Kotlin HTML DSL. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section and see you around. Bye.